I am Moses, and this is my story. There are moments in life when the silence is louder than shouting, when the wind seems to hold its breath, and when every step forward feels as though it may be your last. I have stood before kings without trembling. I have watched the Nile turn to blood. I have seen darkness swallow an empire and death visit every Egyptian home, while the people of Israel were spared beneath the blood of a spotless lamb. Yet nothing prepared me for the day I stood between an impossible sea and an unstoppable army. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still smell the salt carried by the wind from the waters before us. I can still hear thousands of weary feet dragging through the sand behind me. I can still feel the weight of responsibility pressing upon my shoulders more heavily than the staff in my hand. Freedom had finally come. For generations, my people had known nothing but slavery. They had molded bricks beneath the blazing Egyptian sun until their backs bent with exhaustion. They had buried fathers whose bodies had simply given out beneath impossible burdens. Mothers had whispered prayers through tears while their children cried themselves to sleep inside mud brick homes built for someone else's kingdom. I knew that suffering well. Though I had been raised inside Pharaoh's palace, clothed in fine linen and surrounded by servants, I had never forgotten who I truly was. My own mother had held me as an infant before I became the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. I had tasted privilege while my own people tasted oppression. That knowledge had followed me through every hallway of the palace like a shadow. Years later, after I fled Egypt for killing an Egyptian who beat a Hebrew slave, I spent 40 quiet years tending sheep in Midian. I thought my story had ended there. Shepherds are not remembered by history. We simply rise before dawn, lead our flocks to pasture, and return home with aching feet beneath skies filled with stars. Then God interrupted my ordinary life. A bush burned without being consumed, and from that holy fire, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob called my name. Everything changed. Now here I was again, standing at another impossible place where only God could make a way. The journey from Egypt had already stretched every ounce of strength we possessed. Children cried from hunger. Elderly men leaned upon walking sticks polished smooth by tired hands. Mothers carried sleeping babies against their chests. Flocks bleated. Oxen pulled carts filled with everything families owned after centuries of bondage. They were free, yet freedom did not feel like celebration anymore. The towering mountains pressed in around us. The sea stretched endlessly ahead. There was nowhere left to go. As evening settled across the wilderness, the pillar of cloud that had guided us all day glowed with the first hints of heavenly fire. Every time I looked upon that pillar, my heart steadied. God Himself was leading us. We had not wandered here by mistake. Still, questions crept quietly into my thoughts. Why here? Why lead us into what appeared to be a trap? I gripped my staff tighter. A shepherd learns that panic spreads quickly through a flock. If one sheep bolts, others follow without thinking. People are often no different. The first cries reached me before sunset. Someone had climbed a rocky ridge. "They're coming!" another voice shouted. "The Egyptians!" The words rippled through the camp like fire racing through dry grass. Men scrambled onto higher ground. Mothers clutched their children. Faces drained of color. Everywhere I turned, people pointed toward the western horizon. I climbed the slope myself. At first I saw only dust, then sunlight reflected from bronze helmets. Hundreds, no, thousands. Chariots, horsemen, infantry. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath their advance. Pharaoh had changed his mind. The same king who had finally driven us from Egypt after the death of his own firstborn son now pursued us with all the strength of his army. The sound reached us moments later. The pounding of hooves, the grinding of chariot wheels, the metallic rhythm of weapons striking armor. Death was coming. Behind me, I heard weeping. Then anger. The people surrounded me before I had descended from the ridge. Their fear erupted like a flood bursting through broken walls. Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die? Their words struck harder than any weapon. What have you done to us? We told you to leave us alone. It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than die in this wilderness. I looked into faces I had known for months, faces that had once overflowed with hope when they packed their belongings and left Egypt behind. Now I saw only terror. Fear changes people. I had seen courageous men become cowards when death stood close enough to smell. I had watched strong women collapse beneath burdens they never imagined carrying. Fear narrows your vision until all you can see is the danger standing before you instead of the God walking beside you. I understood their panic. The sea blocked every escape. The mountains imprisoned us. The army approached relentlessly. From every human perspective, they were right. We were trapped. I wished I could tell you that courage came easily in that moment. It did not. Inside me, another battle raged. Had I misunderstood God's leading? Had I failed these people? Had I brought thousands of families into certain destruction? I remembered standing barefoot before the burning bush, protesting every reason I believed I was the wrong man. I remembered telling God I could not speak well enough. I remembered begging him to send someone else. Now those old fears whispered once again, perhaps you never changed after all. Perhaps Pharaoh was too powerful. Perhaps this is where your story ends. I closed my eyes only for a moment. The wind brushed across my face, not harsh, not violent, gentle, steady, like the quiet reminder of a shepherd who had never abandoned his flock. I lifted my eyes toward the pillar of fire. God had never failed us, not once. He had turned water into blood. He had covered Egypt with frogs, gnats, flies, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally judgment itself. He had protected every Israelite home, marked by the blood of the Lamb. He had broken Pharaoh's pride when no human power could. If he had brought us this far, he had not brought us here to abandon us. My heartbeat slowed. Faith is not pretending fear does not exist. Faith is choosing to trust God while your knees still tremble. I stepped forward until everyone could hear me. The crowd gradually quieted. Children stopped crying long enough to listen. Old men leaned closer. Women held frightened sons and daughters against their sides. I could hear the Egyptian army drawing nearer with every passing heartbeat. Then I spoke the words God placed within my heart. Fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. The the words surprised even me. Not because they lacked truth, but because I had no idea how God intended to fulfill them. Sometimes obedience means declaring God's promises before you understand His plan. I stood there, staff in hand, facing an impossible sea while an unstoppable army rushed toward us. The people watched me, the army advanced, the wind began to change. The wind shifted so gradually that, at first, only a shepherd would have noticed. For 40 years I had lived beneath open skies. I had learned to read the language of the desert by watching the movement of grass, the drifting of clouds, and the changing direction of dust across the hills. This wind was different. It carried purpose. Behind me, the cries of the people had quieted, replaced by anxious whispers. Before me, the waters of the sea rolled steadily against the shore, reflecting the last traces of daylight. Behind us, the Egyptian army drew closer with every heartbeat. Their torches multiplied across the horizon until they resembled a river of fire flowing toward us. Then something happened that none of us expected. The pillar of cloud, which had always gone before us, began to move. I watched in silent wonder as the visible presence of God lifted from the front of our camp and settled behind us, between Israel and the approaching Egyptians. Darkness fell over the Egyptian side, yet on our side the pillar gave light throughout the night. We could hear the enemy, but they could not reach us. God Himself had stepped between His people and their destruction. I cannot fully describe what that felt like. Have you ever stood behind a father who shielded his child from danger? Have you watched someone stronger willingly place himself between another person and certain harm? That night, I witnessed something infinitely greater. The Almighty became our defender. Before He ever opened a path through the sea, He first became our shield. I realized then that God often protects you in ways you cannot yet see. While you are searching for an escape, He is already restraining what threatens to destroy you. I stood facing the sea, waiting. Then the voice of the Lord came to me with unmistakable authority. Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they go forward. Forward? Everything within me wanted to ask how. Forward into water? Forward where there was no road. Yet I had learned something since that day at the burning bush. God never asks for obedience because His servants understand everything. He asks because He understands everything. Then He commanded me, "But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it." I tightened my grip around the shepherd's staff that had become the staff of God. It was only a piece of wood, worn smooth by years in my hands. There was no power in the staff itself. Every miracle had always belonged to God. Slowly, I raised it toward the sea. For one long moment, nothing happened. The people watched. The children stared. The wind continued to strengthen. Then the impossible began. The waters before us started to move. Not like ordinary waves driven by a storm, but as though an unseen hand was pushing back the sea itself. The roar grew louder until conversation became impossible. Sand whipped across my face. My robe snapped violently in the wind. The water continued rising, higher, higher still. Walls of water stood on both sides, while the seabed slowly emerged before us. Every eye widened in disbelief. The muddy bottom did not remain mud for long. Before thousands of feet could cross, God Himself dried the ground. There it was. A road where moments earlier there had only been sea. No engineer could have built it. No king could have commanded it. No army could have imagined it. Only God. I turned toward the people. No one moved. They simply stared. I understood why. Sometimes the greatest obstacle is not believing God can perform a miracle. It is believing the miracle is truly for you. I stepped onto the seabed first. The ground beneath my sandals was firm, dry, solid. I looked back. Come. Families began walking hesitantly behind me. Children pointed upward toward the towering walls of water that shimmered beneath the moonlight. Fish darted through the crystal walls beside us. I heard gasps every few moments as people realized they were walking where no human being had ever walked before. The wind never stopped. It rushed continuously through the passage, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Every step echoed beneath walls that only the hand of God held in place. I walked slowly, turning often to watch the people. An elderly woman whose back had been bent by decades of slavery smiled through tears. A young father carried his sleeping daughter across his shoulders. Children laughed as fear slowly gave way to amazement. Shepherds guided frightened sheep through the corridor. Every person who crossed was living proof that God's promises are stronger than impossible circumstances. As the last families neared the opposite shore, movement caught my attention behind us. The Egyptians had entered the path. I could hear their commanders shouting orders. Pharaoh's confidence had not disappeared. He believed the same path that saved God's people could be used to destroy them. How often pride mistakes God's patience for permission. The sound of chariot wheels echoed through the passage. Then confusion spread through the Egyptian ranks. Their wheels began slipping. Some broke apart. Others became lodged in the ground. Horses reared in panic. The soldiers shouted to one another. I heard voices carried by the wind. Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. It was too late. Every moment of mercy Pharaoh had rejected now stood as testimony against him. When the last Israelite stepped safely onto the eastern shore, I looked across the sea once more. The Lord spoke again, "Stretch out thine hand over the sea." Once again, I lifted the staff. The wind ceased. The towering walls of water collapsed with a thunder that shook the earth itself. The sea rushed together with overwhelming force. Chariots disappeared beneath the waves. Horses vanished. Soldiers cried out only briefly before the waters swallowed every sound. When morning light spread across the horizon, the sea had become calm once again. The bodies of the Egyptian soldiers washed upon the shore. Not one of Pharaoh's mighty army remained. The same waters that had become a highway for God's people became a grave for those who opposed him. Israel stood in stunned silence. Then joy erupted. Not the joy of surviving by our own strength, the joy of witnessing the saving power of God. My sister Miriam took a timbrel in her hand, and the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Songs filled the morning air. Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. Their voices echoed across the shoreline, where fear had ruled only hours before. As I looked back across those waters, I realized something had happened that could never be undone. The sea had not merely separated us from Egypt. It had separated us from our past. The chains of slavery were gone forever. There would still be wilderness ahead. There would still be hunger, thirst, failures, and lessons yet to learn. But there would never again be Pharaoh's whip. Never again would God's people belong to Egypt. That day forever changed the way I understood the Lord. I had known he was powerful. Now I knew he was faithful. I had known he could judge. Now I knew he could make a way where no way existed. I had known he called people to difficult assignments. Now I knew he never abandoned those he called. If my story has taught you anything, let it be this: your greatest obstacle may become the very place where God reveals his greatest power. There will be seasons when you stand between what seems impossible in front of you and overwhelming pressure behind you. You may not understand why God led you there. You may even wonder if he has forgotten you. He has not. The God who opened the Red Sea has never been limited by what limits you. His timing is perfect. His presence is constant. His promises never fail. When he tells you to move forward, do not measure your future by what your eyes can see. Measure it by the faithfulness of the God who goes before you and stands behind you. Perhaps your Red Sea is before you today. Stand still long enough to trust him, then move forward when he speaks. You may discover that the place you feared most becomes the place where you know him best. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend.